I think we'll make a start. I'm really pleased to welcome you to this lecture from Professor Wendy Luttrell, which is part of, as you see here, a novella and mode joint event. My name's Anne Phoenix, and I'm the principal investigator of novella. And let me just say a little word about what novella and mode are. Apart from being very nice words, they actually signify something. In that both of them are nodes of the National Centre for Research Methods. And what that means is that we are responsible for making sure that we help people to understand the methods we're concerned with better over the 3-year course of our projects. And we're responsible for doing that through project work and through training and capacity building generally. So this is one of the events that's open to the general public, and obviously most of the general public who come are academics, but not all, and is intended to help you think through methods, but in a substantive way, through research and through theoretical ideas. So novella stands for Narratives of Varied Everyday Lives and Linked Approaches. And it's a research methods node that's concerned with secondary analysis that's based on narratives, but also brings in other approaches, has linked approaches with it. And mode, and that, the principal investigator there is Kerry Jewett, who unfortunately couldn't be here because she got knocked off her bike, but the deputy director, Jeff Bezimer, is here. Was here a second ago. Oh, so it's there. And that stands for Multimodal Methodologies for Researching on Digital Data and Environments. And the reason that we've brought these two nodes together to invite Wendy to talk to you tonight is because she has a very innovative way of thinking about methods, and certainly her collaborative seeing both uses narratives and also certainly visual methodology and some digital methods as well. So that she's the perfect person to join us together for this event.
I am very excited to be here to have an opportunity to talk about this research project that started in 2003 and has just been evolving over the years since then. It's now almost 11 years in the making, and I'm calling it collaborative seeing for many reasons, or the process that we use. But I want to start with the fact that a lot of you will probably be familiar with the fact that in the past decade there's been an explosion of research projects giving kids cameras, whether it's still cameras or video cameras, usually as a means to study their social lives and subjectivities, but most particularly to examine the kinds of issues, hardships that young people are facing, whether it be immigration or economic hardship or social injustice or illness or violence or social trauma, barriers to education, to name just a few. And I've really been concerned about what I consider to be a troubling underlying trend in this research that oftentimes is oversimplistic and atheoretical in terms of making claims about children's, quote, voices. I have a particular allergy to this phrase that I'm sure a lot of you also have an allergy to, which is to do research that gives people a voice. I very much want to be challenging that kind of research orientation and thinking, particularly in terms of the use of the visual. I don't think that a picture speaks for itself any more than an interview or a narrative speaks for itself. And yet a lot of the work I find in visual methods with this giving kids cameras is often about the adult voice kind of voicing over what kids are trying to do with the camera, what they're trying to say. And part of this project is about providing as many different opportunities for the young people to speak about the images that they take, and to speak in different contexts, so that it's not always only to an interviewer or only to each other or within the family, but to larger publics as well. The project is meant to explore the role of gender, race, and immigrant status and class in how 34 children represent themselves and their perspectives on immigration, social and cultural difference, and family-school relationships through photography and video. The first iteration of the project, Children Framing Childhoods, started when the kids were 10, and the follow-up revisits them at age 16 and 18. And the idea of this is to trace their multiple meanings that the kids attach to their images over time, and then also as a window into their changing identities, desires, aspirations, and particularly their educational trajectories. So a key objective of the project is to build an audiovisual archive that challenges dominant misrepresentations, particularly of fear and stigma and brokenness and blame associated with young people growing up in communities of color. And I think that the fear, stigma, brokenness, and blame are all words that I am borrowing from the youth participants themselves, who have talked about how they view themselves being viewed by others, and the opportunity to sort of shift the terms a little bit and talk not only about those characterizations that they see out in the world about them. And I think, I said this earlier at the workshop, particularly in the United States, where we have become completely standardized testing crazed, the idea of having images that allow teachers, educators in particular, and community organizers and workers to see outside of the narrow assessment frame and have the opportunity to work with young people to ask them and take what I've been calling a need to know more stance about them and their lives and what they have depicted. The audiovisual archive is also used to support the training of doctoral students in visual methods and to conduct multimodal research using a practice that, as I say, I've come to call collaborative seeing. And I wanted to just start with some of my favorite quotes that also reflect kind of the arc of my own career in terms of thinking about this. I started as a sociologist, I am a sociologist, and was heavily influenced by C. Wright Mills and the sociological imagination. And that, for those of you who don't know, is, in his words, enables us to grasp history and biography and the relations between the two within society. For that imagination is the capacity to shift from one perspective to another, from the political to the psychological, from the examination of a single family to comparative assessment of the national budgets of the world, from the most impersonal and remote transformations to the most intimate features of the human self, and to see the relations between the two. I love the idea of seeing the relations between the two, not only understanding them, which is part of what I think visual methods really allows us to do. And imagination, then moving from the sociological imagination to the ethnographic imagination, because I am indeed a school ethnographer, is another way I like to think of myself, spending many, many hours and days in varied school settings, and I absolutely love the energy of schools, particularly high schools, and have found that when you actually spend time in schools, you have a very different idea, I'm sure any of you who do spend a lot of time in schools, of how formative they really are in terms of identity making and remaking and transforming. And I love this quote by Paul Willis about ethnography being the eye of the needle through which the threads of imagination must pass. Imagination is thereby forced to try to see the world in a grain of sand, the human social genome in a single cell. And for me, the application of this, when we bring it to visual methods, has to do with really sticking in just excruciatingly long and arduously on the image itself first. And in the workshop this afternoon, I talked a lot about the frustration that a lot of the doctoral students that I work with have, because in a 15-week course, I insist on 5 of those weeks spent entirely only looking at the images that have been produced. And I think that that has to do with seeing the world in a grain of sand, in a grain of a piece of the photographs, before we jump to all kinds of other interpretations about them. Photography, then, in terms of the next iteration of the arc of my interest in imagination, it would seem, is all about looks. But the best photographs are great because of what does not appear, leading our imaginations to recruit us as participants. This is from a photographer who has done a lot of giving kids camera work, Paul Dreifel. And this is in a book called Beyond Sight. And I like the idea of being recruited, and I'm hoping to recruit you into some of the photographs that the kids have taken. And another imagination, if we release our imaginations, we may well find them becoming part of our lived reality. This is Maxine Greene, one of my favorite educational philosophers, and I do believe that if anything has been stripped in the current educational regime in the United States, it has been imagination. And so I'm always trying to bring this back. And then our multimodal friends, my favorite arc of the quote here has to do with a new scholarly imagination. Hands-on engagement with digital forms reorients the scholarly imagination, not because the tools are cool or new, even if they are, or because the audience for our work might be expanded, even if it is, both of which I agree, but because scholars come to realize that they understand their arguments and their objects of study differently, even better, when they approach them through multiple modalities and emergent and interconnected forms of literacy. The ability to deploy new experiential, emotional, and even tactile aspects of argument and expression can open up fresh avenues of inquiry and research. And so a lot of what I like to think about in terms of multimodal research is also thinking about different elements or different objects that we use in our data displays and how they take on a different meaning when we are gathering the range of data that we often do when we're doing this kind of work. I have this up here because the Collaborative Seeing Studio, which you can see the website there, has just started in the last month, is now the practice that I've been training doctoral students in at the Graduate Center has now morphed into the Collaborative Seeing Studio, where we meet regularly and other people's projects that are using the same kind of methodology are now posted up there. Our premise is that children and youth are seeing and knowing subjects, and we're committed to giving young people editorial authority over what images they will share and also will be shared with the public, and to offer them multiple opportunities to give meaning and significance to their audiovisual representations. And I want to say that the approach also resists any particular single way of analyzing the children's photographic representations, whether aesthetically or whether as a social practice, which I've been very influenced by Howard Becker's work and everything that he wrote in doing things together as a sociologist. I don't know how many of you might be familiar with him, but he writes a very interesting set of essays about the relationship between the development of photography and the relationship between the development of sociology at the turn of the century, and how confluent the efforts were in terms of documenting immigration in the United States, documenting the very difficult conditions of life, and that the whole use of photography fell out of favor when sociology decided it needed to become more professional and scientific. And yet there was this very early important convergence. So we're not thinking only as in aesthetics terms or as a social practice, which Becker's work would encourage us to do, or as a cognitive developmental process. There's a lot of really interesting work about children's image making and how that benefits their other intelligences, but that's not our approach. And those are the three most common. Instead, the goal, as I said before, is to create this need-to-know stance towards young people and to appreciate the limits of what we can see and know and understand about their lives or their individual subjectivities or their exercise of multiple voices, and that we assume from the very beginning there is no single correct or single answer to the question, what does this picture or video mean? We're also acutely aware that children and youth do not speak in unison about the issues they face in local contexts, and my work in particular has always focused on the complexities, the feelings and intentions that individual children have, as well as children as they self-identify as members of a particular cultural group. And one of the reasons why I believe that we need to refine our approaches within the larger field of visual studies is because we're falling very quickly into a language of youth take these kinds of photos, or youth does this, do this, children do this. And in fact, I think there's just as much complexity on every single level of the child photographer as there is the adult photographer. And we don't treat the child photographer as an apprentice adult, where the idea is to somehow pass on special skills as a new form of literacy, let's say. Instead, we're very interested in the use of the camera that kids themselves will make, and that includes passing the camera on to others, to use the camera for their own purposes, or to share the camera with family members. And an article that I've written called A Camera is a Big Responsibility in Visual Studies describes a lot of the early lessons that we learned from giving kids cameras who had never had a camera before, and found it to be, in the words of one of the boys who participated, a little frightened. This camera is a big responsibility to take home, and these were disposable cameras. So the other part of the situating the collaborative seeing approach that I want to do in terms of where I located in the field of visual studies, I think there is an unfortunate divide within the field, and Doug Harper, who's a visual sociologist, has divided these and has named the two basic approaches that we find in visual research as what he calls the empirical wing and the cultural studies wing. I'm really eager to merge those. I get nervous anytime that there's something that's, quote, empirical and something else that's interpretive or cultural. But in any case, our approach aims to bring these two wings together and to approach it from the empirical wing is said to study social life with images. So in other words, the making of images, whether it's the researcher or the participants, is designed to study specific questions. And in my case, it would be starting with the research question, what are the immigration experiences and perspectives of the young participants in Children Framing Childhoods. The cultural studies wing is supposedly about the study of images, their production, their interpretation, their use, and the social and historical contexts and expectations of the viewing, and also how images travel, which anthropologists Catherine Lutz and Collins write in their book, Reading National Geographic. That's another great book for anybody who's interested in visual methods. And they refer to the complex life of images, which I have very much adapted to talk about the complex life of the images of this project, which is now up to 2,000 odd, as well as 18 short videos produced by some of the kids. And they all have a complex life of their own. They have backstories. They have now traveled between kids, between homes, between schools. They've traveled onto the web. They've traveled here to be shared in workshops. And I think that they need to be seen as both representing social worlds and subjectivities outside of the image themselves, which is the empirical wing, as well as the complex life, their own story of all that we bring to them, which is again part of this collaborative seeing. So over the course of the project, my aim has been to collect multiple eyes, dialogues and interpretations between an individual child and an interviewer, among the youth as they examine each other's photographs and videos, among educators, particularly initially in the school, but then larger groups of educators, and then doctoral students who have taken my course doing visual analysis with children and youth. And the idea in gathering all of these multiple eyes and interpretation is again to contribute to this idea of the complex life of the image. And at each step of the way, there's been an iterative back and forth reflexive opportunity for the kids to see the kinds of interpretations we are making, taking it back to them, getting their input, and then going back and redoing it if we have to. I want to take you into the school and the neighborhood here for a minute and just tell you a little bit about Worcester, Massachusetts, which is in the middle of the state and has an historic pattern of very diverse immigrant population since the turn of the 20th century that continues to this day. So I decided to meet with the school principal, and she was very interested in the question of how kids were integrating into her school as immigrants, but even more so their parents. And so she and I together talked about the possibility of a photography project that would, to do sort of feed two birds with one seed, where she would get extra buy-in from parents and kids because they would be excited about taking photographs, and the parents would then be able to be more visible in her school setting. And I would have visual material to work with the students at Harvard and find that to be a way to really raise and call out different assumptions that the students at Harvard who were going to learn how to, quote, think like an educator might have when they would see images taken by kids growing up in, quote, disadvantaged communities of color. And so it really worked well for both settings because the photographs did really flush out all kinds of ideas once the Harvard students would look at them, and it also provided the teachers at the school in Worcester an amazing opportunity to see inside homes that they had never been inside. The immigrant literature in the United States within the field of education, I think, has pretty much asked one central question, and that is how is immigrant group X adapting to school, and then also how do we explain the academic over or underachievement of immigrant Y compared to immigrant group X? And I think those are important questions, but I don't think they're the only questions. And that was why I was really interested in using photography to unearth other questions and concerns and insights that from the perspective of young people themselves. So I visited the school, I'll give you, and the neighborhood, a kindergarten through 6th grade urban public elementary school in Worcester. Are you able to see that very well? These are the what are called public housing in the United States that are right behind the school that a majority of the students live in, as well as neighboring triple-deckers, which the Northeast is, or Massachusetts is famous for. And the school serves immigrant communities from a range of nations, including, to name a few, Albania, Iran, Kenya, Puerto Rico, and Vietnam. And of the 370 students enrolled, 92% are eligible for free school lunch. Each child was given a disposable analog camera with 27 exposures. And beyond basic instructions of just how to hold the camera and click, we had a discussion mostly with role-playing about ethics of picture taking. And beyond that, the kids were left to their own devices with as little as adult guidance as possible. And they were asked to, quote, imagine you have a cousin your age that is moving to town and coming to your school. Take pictures of the school, your family, and community that will help him or her know what to expect. So that was the initial prompt. And then we brainstormed as a group about what that might also include. So kids would shoot up their hand and say, oh, that means like take pictures of what you do after school, or take pictures of where you feel comfortable. Take pictures of where you feel respect. I thought that was a very interesting prompt, especially in a school situation, that would be suggested as a prompt. It was clear to me that the children associated me and the research assistants with dominant educational values, including, in their words, quote, staying on task. I loved that when kids would come in and they'd have the packet and they'd say, well, I didn't always stay on task. And completing their assignment of taking photographs. And we were very curious to investigate how the children would take up or bend or reject dominant school discourses about performance, achievement, meritocracy, upward mobility. And I could give an entire talk just about all the ways in which they did take up and reject school scripts in their work. But what we learned very quickly was that school did not dominate the visible images, all the visible images that they wanted to bring in and also that they wanted to make public. We picked up the children's cameras and had the photos developed within days of their picture taking. And then a research assistant or I met individually with each child to discuss the 27. And this was the first of 4 different audiencing sessions. So we asked each child to explain what was happening in the image, why she or he had taken it, what, if anything, was important about the picture, and whether there were any photographs that they wished that they could have taken but couldn't. And then at the end of the individual interview, we invited the children to select their 5 favorite ones and the photograph that they felt best represented themselves and that they wished to make public. So all the interviews were videotaped and audiotaped, and we were immediately struck by how differently each child engaged the interviewer and the camera itself as an audience. And there were children, for example, who would speak only to the interviewer. There were other children who would move from speaking to the interviewer to speaking to the camera and hold up a picture for the camera as though there was another person in the room. And then there were children who spoke to their parents as they were talking about the photograph. So one particular child, Gabrielle, held a picture up to the camera and said, "This picture is fuzzy, I'm sorry, Mom. I know you wanted a picture of the church, and it didn't turn out well." And there were many occasions where here we thought that it was an assignment and the kids took it over in the sense of, okay, it might be an assignment, but I'm taking pictures for Mom, or I'm taking pictures for my aunt's 60th birthday, that was a big one, or weddings, or all kinds of occasions that the kids then used their cameras to document. Then we also led small focus group interviews where the children discussed what they noticed in each other's photographs. And that was a time when then entirely different stories and meanings became attached to the photograph because kids were noticing things, interestingly, about each other's homes, many of which they had never been in. And it also generated a conversation about what neighborhoods in Worcester were they considered to be safe and unsafe, or neighborhoods where their parents let them go or didn't let them go, all based on the photographs that their peers had brought in. As the children spoke about people, places, and things that they had photographed, we paid attention to how they negotiated their social places, how they marked social and cultural differences. And one of the biggest differences, if we want to notice in terms of how kids talk to each other about the images, had to do with age. And, referring to siblings and other family members in terms of what grade they were in, which was really fascinating, and whether they had, gone to high school or graduated high school. And then we took the videotaped interviews along with their 5 favorite photographs back to them. It was a video clip of about 7 minutes long. Sometimes they were 10 minutes long. And checked those out with each individual as well as small groups to make sure that they were completely comfortable with what would then become used in the project and go on the web. And then we met with the children to curate the exhibition. This is the final one for the public. And those conversations were also audio taped to learn how they thought about their images in terms of exhibiting them, which then is an entirely different kind of audiencing opportunity. And they selected photographs that they thought were more artistic, or that they thought belonged in a museum or belonged on the walls of the school or the walls of various community centers that we had these exhibitions. This was the final exhibition that the kids made with their various photographs. So to offer an image that I have started to think about in terms of helping to understand the process of analysis is this image that I hope to draw attention to the center of analysis being about how the children used the image. And then realizing that the picture content and the picture taking and the picture viewing all are in some ways allow for more or less opportunity for children to use their photographs in different ways. And then there are larger social forces that also shape this opportunity for the kids to think about how they're going to use their photograph. And this is kind of broken down into 4 different sites of interpretation. So if we think about image production, that there are all kinds of elements that we have to consider going in, thinking about the forces that shape the kinds of photos that the kids would take. And those range from our instructions, the prompt, to the context that it was in school and an awareness of certain kinds of educational expectations, to home context, values and awareness of parental expectations. And one of the biggest things we learned right off the bat was that the kids had to go to great lengths to get photographs of both parents or as many family members as they wanted because of work schedules and incredible shift work schedules where they had the camera for those 4 days, and for many of them they wouldn't have seen a parent because they were constantly shifting a work. And so they would take pictures of either objects that represented the parent or pictures of a picture of a picture. That was one of the most common. And these are all the kinds of things that go into considering what was shaping their image production. And then we also have to consider the image content, and that's something that includes thinking about the genre of the photograph, how many of the kids think about a photograph is supposed to be like something. You know, they have an idea about what a good photograph is and what a bad photograph is. And also what places, settings, people, and objects would be included. This kind of analysis that I call content analysis, we developed a 59 code data dictionary that then has now been, all the photographs have been coded so that we can do a more systematic rather than impressionistic accounting of, is it true that girls take more pictures of girls smiling than boys take pictures of boys smiling? Some of these, like gendered patterns or patterns about immigrant kids definitely taking way more photographs of home contexts and intergenerational representations of intergenerational family dynamics and practices than do the native-born kids. And I myself, the last thing I would ever want to do is spend a lot of time doing content analysis and coding 2,000 images. And so I was glad that I had a team of people who were willing to do that, because that's not my orientation. But it has been very useful to be able to make certain kinds of claims about patterns that would have been unbelievably tedious otherwise. And the most important for me and my interest is in terms of thinking about audience the audiences that the image is talked about, and making sure that there are multiple ones. So who the child is imagining is her or his audience while taking the photo is often different than what the child actually says to the interviewer, and is different, as I said, than what they might say to each other. And then, of course, what teachers, parents, and public viewers say about the photographs is yet a whole another kind of investigation. And I've been gathering lots of interesting data about teachers who view the photographs and bring a particular set of lenses, as we all do. And one of the most interesting, persistent lens that I've been documenting that teachers bring is about order and disorder, and whether that's inside or outside the home. I want to show this photograph and have you just look at it for a moment, if you can. I don't know if you can see it well enough to get much detail. And I just wonder what you see, what you notice. A kid reading a book. Okay? Yes?
With the television on.
Oh, with the television on. Yes, television is on. Uh-huh.
Whoever took the photo, I suspect there's my room. They're on top of each other.
Okay, so you notice that there are sleeping
Yeah, it looks
spaces.
like pillows and blankets and things like that.
Right,
It
right.
doesn't seem like a storage room or anything. It seems like a bedroom.
Okay, so you're suspecting it's a bedroom, but with multiple sleepers. Okay, yeah. I found it interesting that you were already thinking that it would have been a sibling who would be sharing the space. What else do you notice? Yeah.
Bags and shoes.
Sports bags and shoes? Uh-huh.
Hobbies.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Well, I wonder whether she's actually reading or whether she's actually acting out reading. It may well be that, that because it's for a school project, so reading seems to be the thing to do.
Yes. Yes, yes. So you think it might be a posed photograph of reading? Okay, okay. Uh-huh.
But she looks comfortable. I don't know.
She looks comfortable.
Yeah, because while reading, you want to feel comfortable, and to me, she seems to be. I don't
So you think it's, you get a feeling of comfort
Yeah.
as you, okay. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Okay. Uh-huh. Okay. Now, of course, all the last couple of statements are, we're definitely moving into interpretation. That, evidence of a value on reading. Where describing it as she's holding a book is the first level of the looking process, yes? So I'm asking you to stay at the first level of looking for just another minute. Yes?
A lot of stuff, like there's no one place for anything, a lot of stuff,
You see a lot of stuff.
a lot of stuff piled up.
Okay. Uh-huh. Piles.
Piled up.
Uh-huh. Yes. Uh-huh.
Used to store things.
Okay. So you think there might, you see boxes that you're not convinced might have.
Things are overflowing
Fine.
in other areas.
Okay. Boxes overflowing. What else do you see? Good. We're on a roll here now. We're sticking to the details. Right. What do you see? You think that up in the right hand, you think it might be a body? Okay. There may be another body in the room. How many doors do you see?
A lot of doors for a small space.
A lot of doors for a small space, yes. Yes, so you see some paint maybe that's peeled or wallpaper that's peeled on the door. Okay. Now the reason I'm belaboring this is because, and this is, we are only doing that now for 2 minutes. And part of the beginning practice of collaborative seeing is to really spend at least 2, if not 5, if not 10, really studying as much of the detail as possible, because mostly we like to jump very quickly to, I see evidence of the value of reading, or I imagine that somebody has taken this photograph for the participant. She's the participant maybe, and she's handed her camera off. We jump to all kinds of ideas about the relationship between the photographer and the subject. It's one of the clues that we often have in our mind. We figure that whoever has taken this photograph might even be related, for example. That was your idea, right? Well, I know that this was a photograph that you were especially drawn to, Anne? I'm interested why you were drawn to that one.
I was drawn to it because it's multimodal partly. It's what young teenagers spend a lot of time doing, you know, sort of one task while something else is going on, while other people are around.
Great.
It looks like a teenage bedroom. She's fully dressed and so in train to things. This isn't sort of a nighttime process. We don't know sort of what she's doing. Her hair's very neatly sort of combed and so on, so she's not been lying down to read particularly. And I was quite interested in the presentation of self, and I think, you know, I felt it was a comfortable picture as well. She was quite happy to have whoever it was take a photo, and yet it's also quite messy in the way that teenage bedrooms frequently are, as well as the other sort of bits of clutter. Sort of the bedding is also sort of kicked aside on the other side, and the signs of close living, because I think also whoever said that somebody else sleeps in the next bed or whatever, who I assume is taking the photo. And it just seemed to me to have in quite a lot of relationality, of the multimodality, of the potential flipping from one thing to another, and you know, a construction of an identity as both academic, but also with some of the, like with the Nike boxes and so on, some of the trappings of youth and style and so on. Yeah.
Because the next process that I ask in the collaborative seeing practice is, after this intense looking, is to then take a photo that all of the photos people, I'm asking people to do, but in this case I asked the workshop participants to just pick one that you were attracted to or attached to in some way, and develop either a story about what's going on in this, and this really comes from Howard Becker's suggestion for how to do how to use photography in sociology, to allow yourself to be able to pay attention to the detail and the, quote, evidence and the clues, and then also where your mind goes, the evocative nature of the image and where you go with it. Turns out that this, all of the material that you were suggesting, Anne, about these things that are happening at once, is something that the kids really noticed about each other's photographs. Is one of the first things that would have been commented on this one was, oh, I always keep my television on when I'm doing my homework, or I always keep the television's always on in the room. Whereas when Candace described this photograph to the interviewer, she said that she had this picture taken of herself by her sibling to show where she feels respect. This was a picture of respect. Now, why might you imagine, she then explains why she would feel respect in this setting. Other than it raises very interesting ideas about the nature of respect and who gets respect. And
Maybe she feels it's a place of respect because it has something to do with autonomy. So in her room, she actually gets to say how she wants it to be. Yeah, I mean, I do actually hear that quite a bit at home. Something about kids' rights, that this is the place where they actually get to have it as they want it.
Kids taking pictures of their bedrooms and, you know, talking about it as their space definitely became a big theme, even though it wasn't ever their individual space. It was always shared space. But nonetheless, it was their space. So I mentioned this particular photo in there because so many of the individual photographs have that kind of layered bit of background information. And we would only be able to know this not as a prompt for her to talk about where she feels, where she does reading, that it's a valued activity, but also this other element of the idea of home, the idea of the respectability of a home. This is another photograph that I write about in the article, A Camera is a Big Responsibility, because this too is a photograph that had many, many layers of meaning associated to it. And when the young people talked about it amongst each other, they were very taken with this photograph because they thought it looked like a painting. They wanted it in the exhibition. But the child photographer, who is cut off at the very side of the picture, do you see sort of a half of a face there? Jenny, the photographer, said, well, it couldn't be in the exhibition because she wasn't in it. And that made it not a real picture, not a true picture. And so then, of course, they had to choose another one of her photographs to be in the exhibition. But I raised this level of detail about it because it also has to do with the idea that a photograph is evidentiary and that we make claims about it based on it being true or real. And sometimes the kids use that criteria to value or understand each other's work, and sometimes they didn't. And we as researchers always try to think about the, quote, evidentiary claims that the photograph is making. And of course, the convention is, prior to research, is to use photographs as evidence in court, evidence in, as historical documents. And that is not lost on the kids who are using the camera in that way. But this is also a photograph of the family because there is never a time that the family is all together over that 4-day period where she could take the photograph. So it is a photograph of work schedules when you actually hear her talking about it with the interviewer. And to the student observers, many of whom are not Asian American, talked about this photo as representing difference. Oh, this is a picture of difference, which I think is also very telling, and then generated a conversation. Well, why is this family a different family? And opened up a whole dialogue about, among the 6 kids, about who they considered to be different in their school. So again, I'm using one image and pulling out at least 4 different elements of its complex life as it has traveled. And so it has traveled all the way to the United States, and then Jenny took the picture of the picture to document herself and her life in the school. So this is the photograph of Jenny's that ended up in the exhibition because the kids thought it was gross. That was the word. But Jenny loves this fish that her mother makes, and she describes in wonderful detail the crispiness of the tail. And so the various ways that students use their images, and in this case, in Jenny's image that we've just been talking about, include everything from memorializing to identity work, to just the pleasure of the photograph itself, to commemorate special occasions, to gain status, to do cultural and social brokering, to establish solidarity. These are just some of the various uses, and it really depends on the context of the audiencing for us to pull out the various uses. Then I wanted to say a few words about all these larger issues that influence or shape this kind of work, which is there are tremendous numbers of limitations, problematics in doing work with photos. And one big one is who can and cannot participate in these kinds of projects. And in this particular project, there was 1 year where only girls were able to participate because the boys of the 5th grade, too many of them had moms who had restraining orders out on either boyfriends or husbands, and they were concerned about having any images of domestic life anywhere floating around because they didn't want to have their homes identified. So here is this kind of yet another big backstory to the project, that it seems as though sometimes you can, quote, give voice, and of course, you know I'm putting that in facetious quotes, to vulnerable or misrepresented kids, only to find out that some of the most vulnerable and misrepresented kids couldn't participate because of the use of the camera.
I like this one because it came from my dad and I really love him. And, like, he's been with us a long time.
There are a lot of issues in that small clip. The image of the tattoo, Daddy's Boys, which of course we could study and look with every detail possible. And when we hear his explanation about how much he loves his dad and also how they've been together for a long time. And there's a lot in there about being connected, webs of care, which is the theme that this particular researcher decided to put together of all of his material, which really zeroes in on all the different ways that he is cared for and that he himself is caring. And I'm very eager to use and bring more to light the idea about boys and caring, and boys being part of care networks and talking about themselves and others in those terms. Because, of course, there's, in the United States, just this absolutely strangling discourse about boys of color and what is just a reign of over-disciplining. And so a lot of times when teachers or educators who are very prone to think otherwise about young boys of color get to think about other images and other ways in which boys are expressing themselves, it's a pretty powerful moment of recognition. So I want to stop on that note and make sure that we have some little bit of time for comments and talking.